the importance of arts and culture here in Nova Scotia, not only what it contributes to the economy, but what it contributes to the social life of Nova Scotians in many facets, Mr. Speaker. And that is why the government is doubling the funding for arts and culture in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic on her first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not actually sure yet whether the Prime Minister did respond to the Premier. But at least the Premier wasn't the only one to ask the Conservatives to rescind this decision. Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage also wrote to the Minister of Canadian Heritage, José Werner, expressing his deep concern that the decision would result in a severe competitive disadvantage for Nova Scotians. I will table the Minister's letter as well. And my question to the Minister is, has he received a reply from his federal counterpart? And if so, what was her response to the plea for continued funding for arts and culture in this province?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to the member across the way. As a minister over that portfolio, I also very concerned about the cuts of the federal government. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to inform the member across the way that that is not an issue which we have forgotten about. You know very well that there has been a recent election federally, and the Conservatives have returned to power. And I'm moving forward to contact the new minister to make sure that they understand the position of this minister, this Premier, and this government in regards to the importance of culture and heritage in the province of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I can't really tell whether the continued federal government has in fact responded yet to the provincial government from this summer. However, I'd like to also table a briefing note submitted to the Minister on August the 20th, outlining the province's reaction to federal arts and cultural cuts. It was obviously understood that this would be significant, but sections under the headings Impact on Nova Scotia and Largest Impact on Nova Scotia's Culture section have been fully and completely obliterated. I table this note. My question to the Minister, what is so disturbing in this briefing note that the rest of Nova Scotia should not be made aware of it?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, recently I just had the pleasure to meet with the arts community Mr. Speaker, over the weekend, 2 weekends ago, Creative Nova Scotia, where we had artists and people from that industry meet. We had long talks, and Mr. Speaker, we took part in a very successful education process, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what I do know is that this government, Mr. Speaker, this government, listen to me, Mr. Speaker, please. This government has doubled the funding to the arts community by 2011. And Mr. Speaker, I'm sure if you were to Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The Honourable Minister for Tourism, Culture and Heritage has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, what I do know for sure is this government has doubled the funding to the arts community by 2011, Mr. Speaker, over an increase of $8 million, Mr. Speaker, to make sure, Mr. Speaker, that the funding is there for them to advance their work and their profession, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Natural Resources. Many Nova Scotians are facing a tough winter. The cost of everyday essentials are making it hard to make ends meet. And in fact, with the Nova Scotia power increase announced recently and the government's 8% tax increase, things are looking even tougher. Families that use wood are also facing a shortage of firewood. On the eastern mainland, most woods contractors are shipping hardwood to the chipping plant at Sheet Harbour, and more than 300 cords a day go through that facility. So, Mr. Speaker, my question through you, it's great to have an export industry, but when it comes to hardwood availability, what assurances can the minister give that Nova Scotians won't be left out in the cold?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm a little surprised to get a question like that from the NDP because It seems to me that they were the ones that voted against the budget and have voted against the heating assistance rebate plan, which is something which was targeted for low-income Nova Scotians. We're very concerned that nobody freezes in the dark in this province, and we've taken decisive action with that $92 million plan. And in fact, families with incomes under $42,000 or individuals with incomes under $27,000 can apply, and in the case of wood, they can get a $150 rebate. It's very important to make sure we do all we can to make sure all Nova Scotians are able to stay warm this winter.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West on his first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reality of the situation is that, what good is a rebate if you can't get the firewood to begin with? And firewood is scarce. I've talked to a firewood processor in Pictou County that needs 1,000 cords right away to supply his customers through this winter, and he can't find a contractor to supply it. There are homeowners down on the eastern shore that can no longer get cutting permits to cut firewood on Crown land. So why, Mr. Speaker, are Nova Scotians being denied access to their traditional source of winter heat, firewood from Nova Scotia's forests?
The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the member opposite would know, is that hardwood is the source for firewood, and in fact, that's the one area, even in boom times, where we have a surplus of low-grade wood that is absolutely suitable for firewood.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's no surplus out there right now. And this government has been encouraging Nova Scotians to put in wood stoves and wood furnaces. But firewood is scarce. It's a scarce commodity, and people are being left out in the cold. So my question, how does this minister plan to ensure adequate access to hardwood for homeowners who require it this very winter?
The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the member opposite would know, that in Nova Scotia, the vast majority of wood fibre comes off of private woodlots. That is why we have an exemption with the softwood lumber agreement or access to the United States. And of course, those private woodlot owners are the source of a lot of the firewood. And it would be their decision as to whether they want to harvest their forests. Clearly, the wood is out there. We know that there is surplus hardwood available. And I would encourage people to go to the private woodlot owners to make sure they get their winter supply.
The Honourable the Member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Economic Development. Mr. Speaker, recently the government launched pomegranatephone.ca. This website is an ad for a phone that doesn't exist. The phone is falsely billed as a device that has everything from an electric razor to a coffee maker. This non-existent phone is actually the government's attempt to come up with an advertising campaign to promote economic development. Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister, as this province faces difficult economic times, why isn't the government taking Nova Scotia's economic development more seriously?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Communications Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Minister of Communications Nova Scotia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To my honourable colleague across the way, I want to thank him for bringing the pomegranate campaign to the floor of the legislature, Mr. Speaker, because I can tell you that as recently as this weekend, after a Canadian press article ran regarding the success of that campaign, we've had over 220,000 hits on that site, Mr. Speaker, all across the world, who have been very intrigued by our very innovative, creative marketing campaign to incite those very businesses who are looking for cutting-edge, challenging, creative marketing campaigns, Mr. Speaker, for their companies. And indeed, they've been very intrigued that Nova Scotia has offered such a challenging, creative marketing campaign, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Cape Breton South on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I can see why that minister is in charge of Communications Nova Scotia. All of that, what she just told the House, is all on a phone that doesn't exist. That's a very good marketing campaign. Mr. Speaker, a spokesperson for the campaign said that the government wanted to sell the province as a perfect place to invest, work, live, and do business. Well, Mr. Speaker, this website is a $300,000 advertising ploy that focuses on a non-existent phone and does nothing to promote economic development. This government has to use false marketing tactics to promote economic development. The government should be focusing on investing in economic developments rather than costly advertising campaigns. Mr. Speaker, my question again to the Minister of Economic Development: why isn't the government focusing its efforts on an economic development strategy rather than a marketing scheme?
The Honourable the Minister of Communications, Nova Scotia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's very intriguing when one looks at the hits that we've received on this pomegranate campaign, Mr. Speaker, which was very creative, which caught the attention of those individuals who are in the marketplace, who are in a position to influence investments, Mr. Speaker. They actually, when on the site, were so intrigued, Mr. Speaker, once they realized that it was a marketing campaign, that they have indeed made contact, Mr. Speaker, with various individuals here in Nova Scotia. In fact, Mr. Speaker, one of the countries we are experiencing tremendous success in is in Italy, through some of our charter members, Mr. Speaker, who have continued to work their connections, their networks, through to the companies abroad, Mr. Speaker, as well as in the United States. And just as a point of note, Mr. Speaker, it's interesting. A half-page ad, perhaps in a newspaper, in one of the larger newspapers in the United States, could run hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you would have potential hits of perhaps a dozen or two who may be interested. Over 220,000 hits, Mr. Speaker, has been a tremendous advantage to marketing, the marketing divisions here in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Cape Breton South on his final supplementary.
I'll say one thing, Mr. Speaker. That minister has been well programmed on this particular issue. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to know, how does one get a contract like this to promote a phone that doesn't exist and pick up $300,000? Most of the hits were probably people looking for coffee makers or electric razors and wanted to know where they could get them in Nova Scotia. You know, Mr. Speaker, this website is indicative of what is wrong with this government. Instead of focusing on the task of improving economic development, this government is content with developing a scheme to take attention away from the real issue. Nova Scotians are proud of their province and don't feel that the government should use false advertising to attract people and business to this province. My final question, Mr. Speaker, to the minister, whichever minister wants to answer it: when will the government come up with a real plan to promote economic development in this province?
The Honourable the Minister of Communications, Nova Scotia.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my honourable colleague for the tremendous recognition, Mr. Speaker, that I'm well programmed. I'd like to think that I'm finely tuned, Mr. Speaker, and in tune, Mr. Speaker, with the challenges and some of the creative technologies around the province, Mr. Speaker. And certainly, Mr. Speaker, those individuals who have been intrigued by this extremely exciting marketing campaign, and we have received tremendous support from across the sectors, Mr. Speaker. They are indeed those individuals who are up to date on the latest technology, and therefore, the more that we can intrigue those individuals, the better job we've done, Mr. Speaker, with our marketing campaign.
The Honourable the Member for Shelburne.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, in May, I asked the Minister of Health to address the upcoming closures of the emergency department at Roseway Hospital. He told me to get the wax out of my ears. Well, I've had my ears checked, and they seem fine, but maybe I need to get my math skills checked too, because it looks to me like the number of closures is getting worse, not better. My question: can the Minister of Health explain how his plan to keep ERs open has led to more closures at Roseway Hospital?
Good question. The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I remember on the floor of this House apologizing for my comment, and I really don't appreciate when the member brings up something that I did apologize for. I will answer the question as best I can in regards to that. No, I'm going to answer the question because I do respect the member opposite for asking the question.
Remind the Honourable Minister to direct his responses through the Speaker.
Thank you very much. The comment was I did apologize for that comment last sitting. Mr. Speaker, as the member opposite knows, that ER closures are very specific to that local area, depending on the availability of doctors, on the availability of nurses. And Mr. Speaker, I know with conversations that I've had with the District Health Authority that they're doing their best to make sure that that ER is open 24/7.
The Honourable Member for Shelburne on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to apologize for tabling this particular document outlining every single closure, the ER closures at Roseway Hospital from the last year. The number of ER closures is increasing, not decreasing, despite the minister's so-called plan. My question, will the minister admit that there is a growing problem and that his plan is keeping ERs open is not working?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, this government is the government that brought forward a nursing strategy which is working. Mr. Speaker, this is the government that brought forward recruitment and retention efforts that are working. Mr. Speaker, this is the government that is bringing forward health transformation efficiencies that are keeping our local ERs open longer. Mr. Speaker, that is the party that voted against all these initiatives.
The Honourable Member for Shelburne on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The municipality of Barron has developed their own incentive package to attract local doctors and health care professionals. My question again to the minister, isn't that supposed to be his job?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite sat as warden of the municipality of Barrington for quite some time, and the member opposite knows full well that municipalities do have a part to play when it comes to the recruitment of doctors and nurses to their local area. Mr. Speaker, we try to be fair to all communities across the province, and because of that, we have the highest per capita of doctors per population of any other province in Canada. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to be fair to all provinces, all members, all districts in this province. We will be consistent across the province. Mr. Speaker, if local areas wants to step up and help out a little bit to provide other incentives like other areas have done and have been very successful with it, and I urge them to continue that hard work.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over 81,000 individuals in Nova Scotia, including 19,000 children, are living in poverty, 30,000 of whom collect social assistance. The Minister of Community Services announced this year that she's going to help those individuals on social assistance by raising the basic allowance by $4 per month. Well, Mr. Speaker, as noted by a number of poverty activist organizations, $4 doesn't go a long way to put food on the table in these hard economic times. So my question, Mr. Speaker, through you to the minister is, how far does she think $4 will actually go in helping those 30,000 people on social assistance?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to my honourable colleague for raising the issue. He and I have discussed this issue, Mr. Speaker, on many occasions. I know he asks the question out of sincerity, Mr. Speaker. I know that he understands. For 5 consecutive years, this government has consistently raised the income assistance personal allowance, Mr. Speaker, and though we would always like to do more, that is the equivalent of $19 million, Mr. Speaker, and that is a significant investment, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Feed Nova Scotia announced last month that the cupboards are bare and they expect it's going to be a long, hard winter for those people who have to come to depend on their services. This government is out of touch with the reality facing many people living in poverty, and the $4 increase in the basic allowance for social assistance has been largely seen as an insult. So my next question for the minister would be, when will the minister announce an appropriate increase in the basic allowance so that those living in poverty can purchase the basic necessities of life?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, aside from the income assistance increase, Mr. Speaker, and the previous 2-year increase in the shelter allowance, Mr. Speaker, we as well, of course, have the $92 million Heat Smart program introduced this winter, Mr. Speaker. As well, we have the $200 million early learning and child care plan to assist Nova Scotian families with choice in childcare. As well, we saw just today the $800,000 contribution to the Salvation Army, who are great partners with us, Mr. Speaker, to help those Nova Scotians who are most vulnerable. And of course, the worthy, very important partnerships that we have across the province. I know my honourable colleague works in his own community, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that all of those partnerships continue to be healthy to assist those who need us the most.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table the September issue of Nova Scotia Policy Review. It states that while provincial spending has grown by half since 1999, the total amount spent on social assistance has been reduced by $5 million. My question is, why is this government reducing support for those in our society who need it most?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Again, Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague understands that there's a multitude of programs available. I indicated in my first response $19 million, Mr. Speaker, is what that 15.5% increase over 5 years represents. And while I know that's difficult when you break it down to the individual amounts, a $19 million investment certainly is very significant and a serious one. But on top of that, Mr. Speaker, we recognize that there's a multitude of programs which must be in place. They include housing, they include childcare, they include pharmacare, family pharmacare, low-income pharmacare for children. All of those investments, Mr. Speaker, which this government has made, Mr. Speaker, and will continue to make for those most needy.
The Honourable Member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations. My colleagues and I continue to receive calls from Nova Scotians trying to wade through the new, very difficult energy rebate form for individuals with large residential and resource properties. I asked the Minister last week whether people would be forced to reapply time and time again for this rebate after it was determined they would qualify. The Minister gave me an answer full of maybes, probablys, and I don't knows. The Minister had time to go back and check with his staff. So my first question to the Minister, can the Minister tell us here today whether people have to reapply multiple times for this rebate?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, they do, and say the resource properties designated as resource, of course, were not eligible for the point-of-sale rebate. And what happened, as I explained in the House, and by the way, there was a meeting with the Canadian Oil Heat Association today, and I think that particular problem with the distributors is now going to go away. But, Mr. Speaker, no, they have to reapply each time because you're aware if it's resource property or commercial property, then they would be eligible for a tax, the HST rebate on the income tax as part of the tax thing. But what has happened, the form has been redesigned. It was redesigning helped. But the other thing is if it is strictly residential use, that they have residential use, then there are a certain part of the form which will be standard, and basically what they have to do is submit the numbers of litres to get the rebate.
The Honourable Member for Clare on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this form and this program has been confusing from the very first day the government announced it. The most recent changes were not even communicated to those affected 40,000 Nova Scotians. These individuals had to find out when the oil company came to the door. Many of the seniors and low-income individuals are completely frustrated that no one told them earlier that they are being forced to fill out a form that they simply cannot negotiate through. So my question to the Minister is, why are you creating such a large deterrent for low-income and fixed-income seniors to receive this energy rebate?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I indicated my response to his first question is that the form has been redesigned, but he has to remember, Mr. Speaker, is that if these folks are now dealing with a form, they probably should have been dealing with one last year. And once the error was picked up, and indeed the auditors picked it up because one of the oil companies told us that they were putting providing point-of-sale rebate to a property where the tank actually fed a barn, and that was not the intent of the program. Mr. Speaker, once they fill the program out, or the form out once, if it is not mixed usage, straight residential, then basically the biographical information on that form will be retained and it can be copied or anything else. What they have to do is they are clearly applying for a rebate on a certain amount of fuel oil or wood or whatever it happens to be. And there's no way that can be automatically done unless they report the amount that they used.
The Honourable Member for Clare on his final supplement.
Mr. Speaker, the form this government is asking our seniors to fill out is long, convoluted, and in a font so small that most people in this province can't read it. I've tabled a copy of that form last time I rose on this question. Mr. Speaker, I'm amazed that this government would create such a complicated form for this energy rebate. Many seniors are becoming so frustrated with the form that they simply will not fill it out and not receive this rebate. Many seniors will face tough choices this winter, and this rebate could provide some much-needed help. So my final question to the minister, will you go back with your staff and drastically alter the form to make it as friendly as possible so that seniors in this province can receive the rebate they deserve?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, the form was redesigned, and there is a new form out there now. Access Nova Scotia offices, among others, have been told until the new hard copies are available, they're to copy, they download the online version and distribute that. I can find out for the honourable member if the hard copies are now available. I don't know whether they are, but clearly staff went back and reviewed this. And they did redesign the form, and hopefully it is now a little bit easier for those people who had difficulty filling out the initial version now. However, I should say that he is making, in some ways, and I know not deliberately, but one of his colleagues in that other side of the host would classify as a senior, and I'm not sure he would have, just because he's reached a magic age, would have difficulty, difficulty simply because of his age.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scotia Surgery charges this province $500 an hour for their services, plus the hourly rate for their doctors, anesthesiologists, and other specialists. This province has paid a significant amount of money to this private company. Today, I asked senior staff in the Department of Health at Public Accounts what the profit margin was for Scotia Surgery, but he couldn't tell us, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to ask the Minister of Health, how can the government not know what the profit margin is for a private company that Nova Scotia taxpayers fund?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it would also show that the NDP don't understand private business, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite is underlining an issue that we provided over 500, or going to provide over 500 surgeries to Nova Scotians. Right now, they've seen over 250 people have gone through that site and received wonderful service. The satisfaction is phenomenal. 99% of people going through there have classed that as being excellent service, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in our comparisons with other services that are happening in this province when it comes to orthopedics, we're seeing that we're getting a good deal for Nova Scotians. So, Mr. Speaker, I can say that we'll continue to provide good service. Look at the wait times in the province. The wait times in orthopedic surgeries have gone down. Mr. Speaker, orthopedic surgeries, whether it be knees, whether it be shoulders, whether it be hips, have gone down because the Scotia Surgery is providing a service that is allowing the larger system to provide more service. So, Mr. Speaker, I can say that we as a government are very happy and very proud of what Scotia Surgery represents, another option for Nova Scotians when it comes to orthopedic surgery. Another option.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid. The time allotted for oral question period has expired. The Honourable NDP House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you call forward Resolution 3019?
Resolution 3019. On point of order, the Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And on a point of order, earlier the member for Glace Bay asked me a couple of questions in regards to the wait time fund. And I'm going to table a couple of documents. One is a letter from the member opposite that is dated, I believe, August 14th. There's a reply from my office on September 18th, and it reads pretty much like this. Table below shows the amount of funding that the province has received from the federal government for wait times reductions, which accounts for 2.886% of the $4.25 billion.
That is a table.
One at a time. One at a time.
One at a time. You know.
It's not really a point of order. We're back on resolution number 3019. The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's not bad enough he rags the puck during his time. He wants to rag it during mine, too. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise today to deal with debate on Resolution 3019. And as you know, Mr. Speaker, this resolution deals with the fact that the government during the spring budget decided that they were going to introduce measures that were to reintroduce the 8% tax on home electricity, on the basic cost of home electricity, and therefore take out of the pockets of every family in this province some $28 million, which was essentially part of their response to the previous budget, which was in surplus. So I mean, this is the odd thing about this measure, Mr. Speaker. You have a Conservative government that in response to a surplus seeks to have a tax increase. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't know about you, but that seemed to me to be a contradiction in the basic notion of how you go about financing the supply of services to your province. And I've heard members of the opposite side many, many times talk about taxation and about the evils of taxation and about wanting to give money back to the people and keep it in the pockets of the people who earned it. And instead, what this government does is, in response to a surplus, when the government is taking in more money than it needs to provide its services, what they do is find a new way to tax every single family in the province. But what makes it most difficult for most people to understand is this, Mr. Speaker. During the last election, I'm going to table this. This comes from the platform documents of the Premier and of the government. I'll table this as soon as I get a chance finished referring to it. On the front of this document, Mr. Speaker, is a message from the Premier in which he says that our province's families work hard, play by the rules, and pay their taxes, Mr. Speaker. And I think that's something that we all agree with. Inside, there is a letter signed by the Premier in which he makes the following commitment. He says that they will give working families a break through lower taxes on household essentials like energy. So that's in the letter, Mr. Speaker. And then in the document, the fleshed out document, the Premier reiterates, a new Rodney MacDonald government will take the following action to protect our families and secure the future not only for our children but society as a whole by removing the provincial portion of the harmonized sales tax on all household energy costs by January 1st, 2007. And then finally, Mr. Speaker, at the end of their plan, a realistic plan taxpayers can afford, it says that in support of these commitments that the government estimated surpluses over the next 4 years with debt repayment remains intact. So in other words, Mr. Speaker, they have calculated that they can fully afford to fund the commitment that they made to the people of the province. And as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Speaker, the Premier and the members opposite and the candidates and the other ridings, including all of the ridings for which we represent, went around door to door. They stood on people's doorsteps, they gave them literature, and they made that commitment to every single one of them, Mr. Speaker. They told them that they would remove the 8% from the basic cost of electricity right across the province. Now, Mr. Speaker, in case you think that, well, that was one pamphlet, perhaps there was an error in printing, Mr. Speaker, I have here, which I'm going to table. This is dated Tuesday, the 16th of May, 2006, in 2006 in Dartmouth East. I remember that day, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure the member for Dartmouth East remembers it, because the Premier traveled to Dartmouth East to be with his candidate there. And here's what he said. This is the text of his speech, Mr. Speaker. I'm with you here today because we're all coping with high energy bills. Keeping the lights and thermostat on has become more expensive. Families must keep warm and keep safe. It just keeps costing families more and more. Whether we're talking about electricity, furnace oil, natural gas, wood, or any other fuel, families are struggling to cope. And this is what he said. My new Progressive Conservative team, a new PC government, will help. We will rebate a large part of the tax families are now paying to heat their homes and run basic necessities like the fridge. We will remove the province's portion of the harmonized sales tax. That's 8% gone. Mr. Speaker, that's the commitment that the Premier made in his speech on Tuesday, the 16th of May, 2006, and I will table that in case the Premier or the members of government have forgotten the words and the commitments that they made to the people. I will also table the press release, which was issued on that same day, when he specifically refers to running basic necessities like the fridge. Not heat, Mr. Speaker. Basic necessities like being able to keep the lights on and run the fridge, Mr. Speaker. So there can be no mistake about what the government and the members of the government caucus said to the people of Nova Scotia. They made a commitment that they were going to remove 8% on all electricity, all energy usage in the home. And that, Mr. Speaker, is the problem with the actions that the government took in the last budget. They decided that what they told people on their doorsteps, in their homes, on their literature, they decided that they were not going to keep that commitment. They made the decision, they made the conscious decision to break their word to the people of Nova Scotia. That is what they did in the last budget, and they wonder why it is that members of our caucus voted against that, because, Mr. Speaker, we were part of the caucus that voted to support the withdrawal of that tax from people in order to make lives more affordable. Mr. Speaker, the members on this side of the aisle have voted to lower taxes on ordinary families in the province, and the people, the members of the government caucus on that side are the people who have voted to raise taxes on families from one end of the province to the other. From one end of the province to the other. Mr. Speaker, the Premier has said that he stands by his government's tax measures and that the two increases to Nova Scotians are two different issues. Well, Mr. Speaker, what he's talking about in this story in the Chronicle Herald is the difference between the taxation, the 8%, and the proposed increase of Nova Scotia Power. Well, you know something, Mr. Speaker? When ordinary families get their electricity bill, they don't notice the difference between the Nova Scotia Power increase and the 8% increase in taxation. All they see is the number at the bottom of the bill, Mr. Speaker, and what they will know is that the number at the bottom of the bill, the amount that they have to pay, is significantly more, 8% more, because the members of the government caucus and the Premier decided that they were going to break their word to the people of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a privilege to be able to stand in my place and speak in regards to the Heat Smart program in which our government has put in place. I've just listened to the Leader of the Opposition with great interest, Mr. Speaker. And I guess the simple truth is what is said is always open for interpretation. But the true fact is, Mr. Speaker, I have information here that I would like to share with Nova Scotians if they do not already know. The true fact is that this government, our Premier, and different departments are allocating over $92 million to help Nova Scotians pay their heating bills this winter and save energy and money in years to come. Mr. Speaker, that in itself spells success. $92 million, an increase from last year alone. Service Nova Scotia and municipal relations play a part, and also under Conserve Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, play a part also. Two different amounts, two different jobs. Mr. Speaker, I would, for the listening public, I would like to just share this information in case some particular MLAs have not shared these programs with their constituents. First of all, I would like to speak a little bit about the Heating Assistant Rebate Program, Mr. Speaker, increasing the rebate to $450 from $200 of last year on oil, propane, or natural gas. Mr. Speaker, an increase of $450 from $200 last year. Mr. Speaker, increased income levels. This means that more people are eligible, Mr. Speaker, this year than last year. Increased income levels to $27,000 for individuals and $42,000, Mr. Speaker, for families. Mr. Speaker, today we had some attention with the good work of the Salvation Army. And Mr. Speaker, this government has also increased over $400,000 new money and give to the Salvation Army so that they can help people in the time of need. Up to 2,000 families will benefit from this donation this year. Mr. Speaker, we talk about your energy rebate, $47 million, Mr. Speaker, 8% rebate on home heating, saving to about, or I guess, Mr. Speaker, 300,000 people will take part in this. And basically, it would be a saving of $240 on your oil, Mr. Speaker, and over $190 in your electrical bill. Mr. Speaker, I'm trying to share with the people that these programs are in place now, and they can contact the department or their local MLA's office and get the applications necessary for these rebates. Mr. Speaker, this government understands that the cost of energy is high, and we put programs in place to help constituents in Nova Scotia. Also, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to talk now a little bit about Conserve Nova Scotia. Well, Mr. Speaker, things have changed over the years. And I can remember, Mr. Speaker, as a young lad living on the Eastern Shore in the rural communities, that when winter approached, people started to get ready for winter. They were concerned about their heating, they were concerned about their energy costs, and they would do things to help insulate their house, Mr. Speaker. And I can remember driving up the road and watching some of the older chaps, Mr. Speaker, with their wheelbarrows or maybe even a horse and wagon, putting sawdust and eelgrass around the foundations of their houses. Can you imagine? For an insulation factor. I also remember the folks putting up wooden windows, or storm windows as we would call the people would climb up on their house with a window and actually put wooden frames. I'm bringing back a lot of memories to some of the folks that can remember that. And Mr. Speaker, they would remove those exterior windows in the springtime. Also, I can remember people using plastic to cover maybe one entrance that wasn't necessarily going to be used that year. Also, Mr. Speaker, if you were to look at the insulation of houses years ago, sometimes people would use birch bark and cover the cracks of their boards to help insulate their houses. Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that there are a lot of people today that use sawdust or eelgrass or birch bark or use the storm windows, and I know some people still use plastic, but the government has made a change, Mr. Speaker. The government has created Conserve Nova Scotia, and you know what? In a new age, in a modern time, Mr. Speaker, it's basically the same thing. This organization and this arm of government have implemented success stories in helping people cut down the cost of their energy and also save dollars, Mr. Speaker. You know, Conserve Nova Scotia has touched the lives of more than 300,000 people through 50 programs. So basically, if you want to, call Conserve Nova Scotia or your MLA, they will be able to direct and to give you the appropriate information on how to save energy, how to cut cost, and Mr. Speaker, for not only a monetary benefit, but to save our environment. This is a program in which the government started, Mr. Speaker, I remember in 2006, because I happened to be the Minister of Energy at that time, and I was very pleased to be the Minister of Conserve Nova Scotia. So Conserve Nova Scotia, with their programs, with the educational programs, over 50 of them, they have touched 300,000 people, Mr. Speaker. 300,000. That's a lot of people. Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, we mustn't forget the figure that this government has implemented a $92 million program to help Nova Scotians. And Mr. Speaker, today I'm sharing some of the good news with our people. Mr. Speaker, as a government, Mr. Speaker, we are here helping people get through this winter. But we also know that short-term assistance and rebate isn't the long-term answer to rising energy prices. We must be informed. We must be able to take part in the government programs. We must be able to change our light bulbs. We must be able to know to buy energy-efficient appliances, Mr. Speaker. We must know how to properly insulate our houses, Mr. Speaker. We must use the proper R factors when building. And Mr. Speaker, one thing I'm very proud of is understanding and having a bit of a background in building. I was the minister that worked with the department to implement new building codes for our people, so that when we construct new houses, that we make sure through municipal bylaw, Mr. Speaker, that people are building in an energy efficient way. So many things we can do to help save dollars and help to save our environment. Through Conserve Nova Scotia, we can buy CDs, we can get pamphlets, and also, Mr. Speaker, many times there are promotional aids that can help us become more aware. You know, Mr. Speaker, I think that I have to talk about the zero interest loan program in which is offered. This program allows up to $5,000 to people who, Mr. Speaker, wish to take part of this program. Zero interest. $5,000 from this government to help buy new windows, to help increase their insulation, to maybe put some insulation, Mr. Speaker, around their foundation. So many programs are available. And I ask the people, Mr. Speaker, who are listening to me tonight, to make sure they contact the appropriate people to take part in a $92 million program in which this government takes great pride in and is offering to the people of Nova Scotia, and encourage them, Mr. Speaker, to take a part in that program. Mr. Speaker, I've heard in this House a number of times that this government was not acting properly in dealing with the high energy costs. But I'm telling you, Mr. Speaker, that we are sensitive to the cost of energy. And this is not something, Mr. Speaker, that's just happening in Nova Scotia. The whole world has experienced an increase in the cost of energy, Mr. Speaker. But I want to let you know that we're working in the appropriate manner to help Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, to get through this winter, but not only to get through this winter, but to make long-term changes in their life and their lifestyle that will help them save money in regards to energy cost. Mr. Speaker, we don't have to put birch bark on the cracks of the boards anymore. We don't have to put sawdust around our foundation, because this government is moving in a responsible way and have put programs in place to help our seniors, who have helped people who are experiencing high cost in energy, Mr. Speaker. So I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity, and I hope tonight I've been successful to share this $92 million program that this government has put in place to help Nova Scotians. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Ça me fait plaisir de faire quelques remarques sur la résolution 3019 qui a été présentée à l'Assemblée par le chef du parti NPD. Monsieur le Président, je peux vous dire que j'ai reçu les nouvelles qu'il y aurait un débat ce soir sur la question d'énergie. J'étais content d'avoir l'occasion de faire quelques remarques au nom du peuple de Comté de Richmond, mais je peux aussi partager avec vous que maintenant que je vois la résolution, je suis un peu déçu du fait que la résolution parle seulement de la question d'électricité. Parce que, Monsieur le Président, vous savez vous-même, le peuple à Richmond, le peuple à Clare et le peuple des gens de Nouvelle-Écosse partout à travers la province, ce n'est pas juste une question d'électricité, c'est une question du chauffage avec l'huile, c'est une question du chauffage avec le gaz naturel, c'est une question avec le chauffage avec le bois. Et puis ça, c'est les vraies questions qui font face à nos citoyens. Quand on parle d'énergie, il faut toucher sur tous ces sujets-là. Et malheureusement, la résolution ne nous donne pas d'indication sur le fait, sur ce qui fait face aux gens de Nouvelle-Écosse, sur toutes ces autres questions d'énergie. Monsieur le Président, on sait bien que ça fait juste quelques mois maintenant que le prix de l'huile à chauffage ici en Nouvelle-Écosse était rendu au-dessus $1. Le fait, je sais que je connais même des gens qui ont acheté de l'huile à $1,25. Mais $1,25, autant, ils étaient en train de dire que le prix allait être augmenté jusqu'à $1,40, $1,50. Alors 125, au moment donné, c'est un beau prix. Aujourd'hui, ce n'est pas un beau prix, parce qu'on sait tous que le prix de l'huile à chauffage est tombé maintenant, comme le prix de l'essence est tombé aussi. Et on s'attend que ça va tomber même plus, Monsieur le Président, parce que ça va être un hiver qui va être très triste pour les gens de Nouvelle-Écosse si qu'il n'y a pas de change. Monsieur le Président, je peux vous dire que chez nous, et je pense que c'est la même chose chez vous, on entend des familles qui disent qu'ils vont laisser leur maison l'hiver et aller rester soit avec leurs enfants, avec leurs sœurs ou avec un autre membre de la famille, parce que c'est impossible pour eux à demeurer dans leur maison tout seuls cet hiver avec le prix du chauffage, n'importe de quelle façon qu'ils vont chauffer leur maison. Ce n'est pas une question, Monsieur le Président, qu'on est content de voir qu'il y a eu une augmentation de le rabais qui est disponible aux gens de Nouvelle-Écosse qui chauffent avec l'huile, qui chauffent avec le gaz naturel, qui est maintenant augmenté à $450. Mais on entend aussi des gens qui chauffent avec le bois, qui nous disent « Oubliez pas, comme parlementaire, le fait que le prix pour acheter des cordes de bois a augmenté aussi. » Mais malheureusement, le rabais qui est disponible pour ces citoyens ici, c'est $150. Puis on sait bien que $150 pour acheter du bois de chauffage aujourd'hui, ça ne va pas aller loin. Mais j'espère que j'ai eu un appel aujourd'hui juste pour me rappeler de ce fait-là et j'espère que le gouvernement va prendre ça et puis réfléchir. Est-ce que c'est le temps de faire certain que les rabais sont plus réfléchis, le vrai coût pour les gens de la Nouvelle-Écosse? Parce que les gens sont en train de dire, pourquoi si je chauffe avec de l'huile, j'aurai l'occasion d'avoir $450 de rabais, mais à cause du fait que je chauffe avec du bois, je peux seulement recevoir $150. Peut-être des années passées, $150 pour du bois, c'était un montant qui était correct, mais aujourd'hui, Monsieur le Président, c'est très clair, spécialement pour le bois dur ici en Nouvelle-Écosse, c'est la demande, l'augmentation de la demande pour le bois. L'effet est que le prix pour du bois a augmenté en même temps. Mais malheureusement, le rabais qui est disponible pour les gens de la Nouvelle-Écosse, ça demeure le même montant. Et, Monsieur le Président, c'est aussi la question que les gens de Nouvelle-Écosse ont à faire application pour ce rabais. Nous savons, ça fait 10 ans que je suis ici maintenant, mais nous savons que quand le gouvernement a offert des programmes comme ce programme dans le passé, que dans des cas, seulement 40% des gens de la Nouvelle-Écosse qui avaient le droit de recevoir ont appliqué. Alors, il faut poser la question, est-ce que le gouvernement a mis ces programmes ici en place en sachant que les gens de Nouvelle-Écosse, ceux qui ont le droit à ce rabais, ne vont pas en faire application? Et puis, une des gens chez nous m'a posé la question, est-ce que ça ne serait pas possible pour le gouvernement à nous envoyer le rabais directement et que nous n'aurions pas à faire application? J'ai dit, vous posez une très bonne question parce que je sais que le gouvernement tout de suite dirait, non, ce n'est pas possible, il faut que les gens fassent application, c'est impossible pour nous de faire ça, mais avec la bonne mémoire politique, Monsieur le Président, vous vous rappelez vous-même que durant le temps du premier ministre John Ham, juste avant une élection, le gouvernement a envoyé des chèques aux gens de Nouvelle-Écosse pour 155 $. Et puis, peut-être que vous vous rappelez, Monsieur le Président, parce que de ma mémoire, il ne fallait pas appliquer pour cet argent-là. Le gouvernement avait trouvé un moyen d'identifier qui, à la Nouvelle-Écosse, avait le droit aux 155 $. Encore, c'est juste avant une élection. Mais à ce point-là, ils ont pu les identifier. Mais maintenant, ils disent non, 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 il faut faire application premier. Et puis, si le ministre serait pour nous répondre à la question, quel pourcentage des gens de la Nouvelle-Écosse qui avaient le droit au rabais dans les dernières quelques années, quel pourcentage ont fait application? On verrait que les nombres sont beaucoup trop bas. Et alors, il y a trop de familles que, pour n'importe quelle raison, Monsieur le Président, ne sont pas au courant qu'ils ont le droit de recevoir ce rabais. Et en même temps, Monsieur le Président, vous-même, vous avez soulevé les problèmes avec l'application pour certains gens de Nouvelle-Écosse. Et la réponse qui est venue du ministre et les formulaires qui ont été mis disponibles, ben vous savez vous-même, vous recevez des appels à tous les jours à votre bureau avec les problèmes qui continuent. Alors, il faut se poser la question, quand on regarde la situation, est-ce que le gouvernement est sincère pour vouloir assister aux gens de Nouvelle-Écosse, ou bien est-ce que c'est plus une façon de dire, voici le bon programme que nous avons, et une fois que des problèmes sont soulevés, ils font le mieux de ne pas les adresser? Est-ce que c'est à cause qu'il veut moins de personnes qualifiées pour le programme? Parce que le plus qui qualifie, le plus cher que le programme va être. Et pendant que le gouvernement nous dit, bien, nous avons déjà budgété un certain montant d'argent, si on regarde dans le passé, dans les autres fois ce programme a été offert, bien, c'est très clair pour le gouvernement que certains montants qui ont été budgétés ne seront jamais dépassés. Alors, est-ce que c'est ça qui est l'intention? Je ne sais pas. Mais moi, je peux partager avec toi, Monsieur le Président, mes efforts chez nous pour faire certain, aussi bien que je peux, que tous les gens du comté de Richmond qui qualifient pour ce rabais vont faire application. Je l'ai posté au journal. Je l'ai posté sur la station de câble chez nous, les 2 stations de câble, que les formulaires étaient disponibles à mon bureau. Et en même temps, Monsieur le Président, comme vous le savez bien, je fais un rapport chaque mois à la télévision. Et sur ce rapport-là, j'ai tout expliqué le programme. Et chaque fois que je fais mon rapport, je continue à rappeler les gens que c'est absolument nécessaire qu'ils font application s'ils qualifient. En même temps, je les encourage de partager cette information avec leurs parents, avec leurs frères, avec leurs sœurs, avec leurs voisins, avec leurs amis de la communauté. Parce qu'ils ont l'occasion maintenant de faire application à ceci. Est-ce que c'est un montant qui va adresser tous les problèmes d'énergie qui fait face à notre province? Il n'y a pas de question de ça. Et c'est clair que nous avons beaucoup plus qu'il faut faire. Les gens, j'ai eu un appel d'une madame aujourd'hui qui m'a dit qu'elle chauffe avec l'électricité. Elle vit dans un appartement. Mais elle a dit qu'elle ne chauffe pas, elle n'utilise pas assez d'électricité pour qualifier pour le rabais qui est offert par la province. Alors, elle m'a posé la question, elle dit, à cause du fait que je fais mon mieux d'utiliser aussi moins d'électricité possible, d'une essence, je me fais punir par le gouvernement à la place d'être félicité pour ceci. Et elle se pose la question, si quelqu'un avait toujours la chaleur, ils allaient recevoir le rabais, mais moi, à cause du fait que j'ai coupé, je voulais être responsable, je ne le reçois pas. Alors, Monsieur le Président, c'est très clair que nous avons beaucoup à faire, comme parlementaires, pour adresser les problèmes d'énergie des gens de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Et comme je l'ai dit, cette résolution, au moins, nous donne l'occasion d'avoir le débat, mais j'espère que cette résolution ne va pas seulement faire face à la question de l'électricité, mais va garder à toute forme d'énergie qui est utilisée par les gens de la Nouvelle-Écosse pour adresser le fait que nos familles à travers la Nouvelle-Écosse et les gens de Nouvelle-Écosse peuvent passer cet hiver en chaleur, en sécurité et en paix. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci. Chair now recognizes the honourable member for Cape Breton Centre. The honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister of Health wanted me to do it en français, and Well, I'll say to you is I'm going to have a hard enough time doing most debates in English, so it's agreed. See, I finally get some support in this House. I get no support in this House, and I get no support in the House in Lingayen, so bear with me. And I'm getting no support from my colleagues. You know, Mr. Speaker, I know you guys do. Mr. Speaker, what was interesting when I heard the Minister of Tourism and Culture respond to this resolution today was he didn't. He talked about programs and, you know, for anybody in this House to stand up and talk about energy conservation from that side is pretty ridiculous. But it gets into the bizarre realm when that minister gets up, and he's the guy that, if you remembered, was waxing poetically about wind turbines and that the wind doesn't always blow in Nova Scotia. And he's the same guy when he was in energy, cut a deal with a large multinational hardware outfit so you could go and get one light bulb, and it was only here in Metro you could get it. If you were down in Yarmouth or if you were in Pictou County, Mr. Speaker, it would cost you 20 times that much in wasted fuel to go buy this one light bulb from under the leadership of that minister, and then he comes up and tells us how proud he is of his government and under his tutelage, how that department worked so well. Well, Mr. Speaker, it didn't work well, but really we're digressing here because the real debate here tonight is about taxation. And what did the government raise taxes when they said in their literature when they were running for office that this was not in the cards? Not once, but twice, as my leader pointed out, Mr. Speaker. Yet the government wants to push that aside. They want to push that aside and talk about kind of some of their programs that really haven't worked. But yet the one thing we do know out of the government's budget was that Nova Scotians, for sure, are going to be paying more taxes on their electricity. You know, Mr. Speaker, we've just come out of Remembrance Day yesterday, and, you know, we've seen many of our seniors who are spectacular at going out and supporting these various rallies for Remembrance Day, and many of them were there in the very cold weather, and these are the same people that are returning to their homes after those observances, Mr. Speaker, and they're the ones on fixed incomes that are being asked to pay higher electricity rates. And I guess somewhat, I don't blame the government member for not hitting that point, because that is not a nice point to say. My government raised taxes. They raised taxes on some of the most vulnerable people in this province, our seniors and other people on fixed income. Now, these same people are the ones that couldn't go to drive to Dartmouth or to Sydney to get a light bulb, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these people have a hard enough time getting to the grocery store for milk, butter, and bread. But yet, they see this foisted on them by a government that told them, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to vote for us. Vote for us. We're not going to raise taxes. You know, we remember there was a government not so long ago in the United States when the presidential candidate said, read my lips, no new taxes. And we see what happened to that government, Mr. Speaker. And we see the same thing happening to this government. When they say no new taxes, this is not something that the NDP have brought forward. This is not something that we're making up. This is something that the Executive Council got together and said, how are we going to get more money in the coffers? And what did they do? They said, look, let's take a utility. Let's take something that every man, woman, and child in this province needs, and let's put more taxes on it. And what do we see? We see that, plus then we see the 9.3 increase in that cost of getting that. Then we lump that 8% on top of it, Mr. Speaker. So, you know, it's nice to talk about the fact that government would like to see Nova Scotians conserve, and that, you know, to that, Mr. Speaker, nobody really disagrees with the perspective of conserving energy. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, when you have people on fixed income who, just by their age, are living in older stock housing, and they just, you know, the R value of some of those homes are probably below 6%, Mr. Speaker. And how do they save energy? Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, we know how they save energy. They put another sweater on, put an extra blanket on the bed. Is that the really dignity that we want to see the Nova Scotians are left to deal with, Mr. Speaker? It's often said, you know, we're judged as a civilization, how we treat the most vulnerable. And this 8% increase on home electricity is one of the most outrageous taxes that have been levied on Nova Scotia consumers in quite some time. You know, we're at a point here, Mr. Speaker, that many of our citizens are wondering what we're going to do. Because earlier in question period today, the member from Pictou East, when questioning the Minister of Natural Resources, was asked a very direct question. There's a resource that we often took for granted that many Nova Scotians could just get off sometime off their own land, was hardwood. The minister, to my estimation, didn't answer that question. This is a fuel that many Nova Scotians could use. But as we know, this is, again, not an NDP line, but from the producers who are saying, look, we just don't have enough to supply that end of the consumer chain. We're settling it off to other sources. Now, many of our people that may have had wood pellet stoves, Mr. Speaker, people are waiting in lineups right into probably Christmas to get wood pellets for the stove. So, Mr. Speaker, many Nova Scotians are miles ahead of this government when it comes to conservation and looking at alternative sources for fuel. But the reality is that most people, I would dare say 99% of Nova Scotians, live on the grid. So, Mr. Speaker, that many living on the grid, how are we going to conserve when government says, here's an 8% tax? The cost of that energy goes up by almost 10%, but we're going to do this. So, you know, Mr. Speaker, we know that by recent CPI, consumer price indexes, one of the largest factors for increase in CPI in this province is energy costs, Mr. Speaker. Energy costs are moving up at a very, very accelerated rate, and it's harder hit here, Mr. Speaker, than most other provinces. So what we have is kind of, for Nova Scotians, a perfect storm of not very nice consequences. We see energy costs going up as a force on CPI, and then we have our own government trying to tax them. It's a double whammy. So why would government tell Nova Scotians when they're going door to door on election day and through that whole period that we're not going to touch your taxes? And yet, within a year, they break their promise, Mr. Speaker. They knew back in May 06 that this was wrong then, and it's wrong now, Mr. Speaker. Why today didn't the minister stand up and give an explanation of why they did it? Why didn't they do that? Instead of talking about programs that failed, like to the nth degree, the failure was so great, Mr. Speaker. But they wanted to talk about that, but yet they will not stand in their place and say, this was a reasonable approach we took to taxation. They know that's wrong. They know that during the election period, they told people, as the old George Bush regime said, no new taxes. Read my lips. And Mr. Speaker, there are new taxes. This is not to help Nova Scotians. This is hurting Nova Scotians. This is a basic pocketbook issue, Mr. Speaker, that Nova Scotians will not accept. We're on the eve of winter, and we need some reaction from this government, and I say do the right thing and rescind this 8%. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Time has expired for debate on Resolution 3019. The Chair recognizes the Honourable, the House Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You call Resolution 4511, please.
Resolution 4511. The Chair recognizes the Honourable, the Member for Shelburne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to stand here today in my place and present this particular resolution 4511. I'd like to read a paragraph or two of this just to get it on the record. And whereas on October the 29th, 2008, the Department of Fisheries and Ocean presented changes entitled Instructions to the Area Licensed Staff for the Maritime Regions to the LFA 34 Advisory Committee, and whereas the fishermen and their representative in the LFA 34 are appalled that these decisions, which has the potential to damaging the independence of the inshore lobster fishery, was made without any consultations with the LFA 34 Advisory Committee, therefore be it resolved that the House requests the Provincial Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture to immediately write his federal counterpart calling for a meeting including all stakeholders to ensure that any changes made to these licenses reflect the best interests of our lobster industry in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I want to get that on record because I think this is very important. The basic premise of this whole discussion tonight here is the lack of consultation. And Mr. Speaker, we're standing here this particular year in the birthplace of democracy. It is in this very simple House which marks the birthplace of democracy in Canada on the occasion of the 250th anniversary of representative government in Nova Scotia. We ask the Minister of Fisheries to write a simple letter to support the request of coastal communities across Nova Scotia and to protect fishing grounds, to protect the fishing communities, the survival, and to protect the independence of all, and all we get is no, no, no. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that many of us remember the fictional character from the mid-1970s, Henry Winkler, who played the Fonz. I think we all remember him. Fonz had a very difficult time in saying the word wrong. I think he tried different times. He was wrong, as close as you could get to it. Mr. Speaker, the Provincial Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture has been wrong on several resolutions dealing with the fisheries in the last several weeks. Absolutely. And they are, and I'd like to take the time to point out a few of them. First, he is willing to ignore the opinions and the advice not to continue a moratorium on George's Bank. That's wrong. Second, request for funding to research a project for the use of an underwater camera to gather valuable information while lobsters are in their molting process. That's wrong. That's wrong. And third, and support of holding a public inquiry into the Atlantic fisheries. That's wrong. And this one here we'll have to spend a little time on. The last session, the fourth issue, the first resolution dealing with having costs not put on the species at risk list. After a late debate, after redrafting the new resolutions, it was finally passed by the government. And fifth, and just lately, a request for the Minister of Fisheries to write a simple letter to the federal counterpart to ensure that any changes in the licenses reflect the best interests of our lobster industry in Nova Scotia. A simple letter. Mr. Speaker, a few days ago, fishermen met with the Department of Fisheries in Yarmouth. They had a meeting and they were appalled at the way that this particular conditions was parachuted into conditions of this upcoming season, which is only literally days away. I'd like to read a portion of the local paper, and I'm going to table this after I do, Mr. Speaker, and not get too nervous about me using a prop. But I want to read into the record. The local paper, the Yarmouth County Vanguard, the voice of Southwest Nova Scotia, was dated November the 11th, and this is the front page. This is not on the back page somewhere tucked in that we have to thoroughly read the paper and hopefully that we can get the message. This is the front page where the people want to know what the story is about, the importance of the story. The editor put it in bold letters, and I'll read the headlines, Mr. Speaker. DFO policy infuriates lobster fishermen. And I'll read a quote from the first paragraph. Lobster fishermen in southwest Nova Scotia were infuriated as they recently listened to DFO officials explain the policy that allows for stacking of 2 licenses on 1 boat. And Mr. Speaker, I give the opportunity to table that. And in the interim of that, when that was all taking place, we asked this minister in this House to write a letter. And he said no. The interesting part that the editor on the Southwest Nova Scotia in Yarmouth felt that it was a major news item and put it in bold letters. There's a disconnect there. I would strongly suggest that there is a very disconnect between the fishing communities and this government and the provincial Minister of Fisheries.
Absolutely. He's wrong.
The importance of the above topic clearly shows that the provincial Fisheries Department and this government is simply out of touch, or they simply do not understand the issues, or they are asleep at the wheel. Policies or public policies is killing our coastal communities, and in the early 1970s, our fishing communities thrived because the decisions were made at the local level. And pardon the pun here, but if we want to turn to happy days, we better start having some of them local decisions made at the local level, and we should start sending some letters to Ottawa. Mr. Speaker, in April of 2007, DFO announced measures to preserve the independence of the inshore fleet in Canada's Atlantic fisheries. Mr. Speaker, fishermen across the Atlantic provinces had demanded this review be concentrating on licenses and not to curtail the concentration of licenses in the hands of the few. Today, these conditions, fishermen have been blindsided and have no input or no consultation. And this provincial government does not have the courage to even write a single letter.
That's wrong.
Mr. Speaker, this government, in regard to the fisheries policy on the above topics, have simply no direction, no voice, and no leadership.
Shameful.
Mr. Speaker, even our federal MLAs, from the Liberals and the Tories, have remained silent. And I suggest to you on the above topics, the silence is deafening. And my recommendation to our provincial minister and his government to follow the advice of the LAF 34 Management Board and request a meeting to the new Federal Minister of Fisheries and show some leadership. And there's a simple saying: you can either lead or you can follow or just simply get out of the way. And that's what I'm asking tonight. We need collectively here is to send a letter. We want an emergency meeting with the federal minister. We need to shelve these conditions until people are consulted in our communities, and let's get back to the glory days of the 60s. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I guess I want to thank the honourable member from Shelburne for bringing this resolution forward, and number 4511 DFO lobster license policy. And as well, Mr. Speaker, I guess he mentioned a number of things there that I really should comment on, that we had taken no action on issues like the Georges Bank, and I can assure that honourable member we have taken a stand on Georges Bank as it is described in the legislation. The underwater camera to look at lobsters that may or may not be damaged. Mr. Speaker, we in fisheries we have absolutely no mechanism in place to be able to do a project like that. If they want to go to DFO, and DFO would be the one. The issue on the cusk, we have taken a position on. We have spoken to them for a long time. The previous minister has spoken about that. So we've taken a lot of issues on. And as far as Mr. Speaker, the resolution that was defeated here last week, I guess it was, on the letter. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you and all members of this House and all fishermen out there that I have a letter that is going to the federal minister to deal with this issue. Not because they have, because I, as the Minister of Fisheries, have a responsibility to do that, and that's what is being done. And it will be done immediately. And what I'm asking for is a meeting with that minister to relay the concerns of the fishing community and the industry in the province of Nova Scotia. So, and having said that, Mr. Speaker, I am very pleased to be here tonight to speak about the opportunities to talk about the lobster fishery in Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, as we all know, the lobster fishery is the most important fishery in the province, having a landed value of $350 to $400 million on a yearly basis. And as well, Mr. Speaker, we have 3,400 lobster licenses. When you add crew members to this, the number of people employed in the fishery alone is around 10,000. And as well, Mr. Speaker, the commercial fishery drives the economy of our coastal communities, and the lobster is the economic engine for that. And as well, the lobster industry is important in all regions of the province. But our biggest and most important lobster area is Area 34 in southwest Nova Scotia, which will open in very soon. And Mr. Speaker, there is 970 enterprises in southwest Nova Scotia that fish lobster. So, Mr. Speaker, the lobster industry has faced a number of challenges over the past few years. We all know that. The resource has been very strong in most areas, with the Northumberland Strait as an exception. But, Mr. Speaker, economic factors have created pressures. Over the past year, exchange rates and the fuel cost have been big problems. We all know that. When our dollar was about 70 cents US, a 100-pound crate of lobster sold into the US market at $6 a pound and would bring approximately $857 home to Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, that same crate of lobster sold last spring, when our dollar was at par, would fetch about $600 a crate. So, Mr. Speaker, the loss of $1.57 per crate was due to the exchange rate. Things were also different last spring. On top of the price problems, there was also increased costs, particularly in fuel, with prices hitting all-time highs. The exchange rate and the fuel prices have recently improved for the lobster fishermen, but there are new challenges, Mr. Speaker. The global economic troubles have had an impact on luxury food items such as lobster. People are very cautious with their spending, and they are not eating out as much at high-end restaurants. This fall, U.S. fishermen were selling their lobsters for as low as $2 a pound. And if the NDP had any interest in the fishery, they would be looking for solutions to the price problem that we could see this fall. But, Mr. Speaker, I believe that our lobster in Nova Scotia is of a much better quality than it is in the U.S. While we target the lucrative Christmas market in the U.S., there are concerns about pricing as we head towards our important fall season that opens later this month. Mr. Speaker, given the uncertainties in the lobster markets in the United States, my staff is looking at a number of marketing opportunities for our lobster products. Presently, we are working on a Canadian holiday lobster promotion in major cities in our western provinces. And, Mr. Speaker, it's my intention to be a part of that delegation as well. Hear, hear. While we don't expect to replace our major U.S. markets, we do hope to expand our domestic consumption and establish more market options for our live lobster. And, Mr. Speaker, another concern we have with our Japanese market, which consumes probably 8% of our export market in Canada, in Nova Scotia, is with the issue with the PSP and tamale, where the Japanese are not buying our lobster because of that. Just last week, Mr. Speaker, I met with the ambassador for Japan concerning that issue. That was top on the agenda for that meeting. He realized the concerns, and when we indicated to him that the CFIA and the food safety programs that we have in place, he sure had a better understanding of where we're at with our export market in lobster to that country. And he had indicated that he would try to do what he could to help us with that issue. And, Mr. Speaker, the big issue has been the owner-operator policy and the so-called trust agreements. And, Mr. Speaker, I know the member for Shelburne, as well as probably the member from Digby, know exactly all about trust agreements. They've been in the fisheries for a long time. They have lobster licenses as well as other licenses. And, Mr. Speaker, maybe they have trust agreements, I don't know. But has been an issue, and it has been an issue for a long time. Owner-operator, Mr. Speaker, means what it says, that is, the lobster license can only be owned by fishermen who actually do the fishing on their boats. The goal behind this policy is to have the wealth from the fishery stay with the fishermen in our coastal communities and not have to go to any investor who may not even live in their province. And, Mr. Speaker, this government has supported that owner-operator policy right from day one. They've been fighting it for the last 5 years under different ministers. Mr. Speaker, there were concerns that some investors were getting around the policy through trust agreements. The license would be held in a fisherman's name, but the real owner was the investor who had a trust agreement with the fisherman. A little over a year ago, DFO strengthened their owner-operator policy by requiring fishermen to declare whether or not they were truly independent. And, Mr. Speaker, we as a government supported that. Those who were not truly independent and their investment partners were given 7 years to get out of controlling trust agreements. This was a very controversial issue with strong feelings on both sides. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, the majority of fishermen in virtually all regions of the province supported the stronger owner-operator policy. However, it did create a new problem. Where would the money come from for young fishermen to buy lobster licenses? Mr. Speaker, last spring, my government took steps to address this issue by introducing a Loans for Licenses program, which I am sorry to say that the NDP opposition voted against. Unbelievable, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that I heard from the member from Shelburne the first day that I became Minister of Fisheries was, we have to come up with a Loans for Licenses program. What does he do when we do? He votes against it. He voted against it. The member from Pictou East voted against it. Fisheries is a big issue in Pictou East. The member for Pictou West voted against it. You know, the member from Hants East voted against it as well. Fisheries is very important. What about the member from Halifax? Halifax, Sable Island. Sable Island. Sable Island, a very, very important part of the fisheries in the province of Nova Scotia. Can't believe that they would vote against it. The member from Halifax Atlantic, which takes in Sambro, voted against it. Voted against it. one of the biggest fishing communities in the province of Nova Scotia in Sambro. The leader of the opposition, Eastern Passage. How many fishermen fish out of Eastern Passage? They voted against it, Mr. Speaker. So Mr. Speaker, that loans program. Well, I have to give the Liberal Party full marks for voting for this policy, really, Mr. Speaker, because, Mr. Speaker, it's a program, Mr. Speaker, it's a program that the fishing community from one end of this province asked us to put in place. Mr. Speaker, we did. The official opposition decided that they didn't want to be part of that, so they voted against it. For whatever reasons, I don't know, Mr. Speaker, but congratulations to the Liberal Party for doing the right thing and voting for the fishermen in the province of Nova Scotia. So, Mr. Speaker, like staff right now are currently working on the rules, the lending rules, and the process for this new program. And our target date to have this program up and running is April 2009. And Mr. Speaker, we're on target, and we are very confident that we will have money going out the door to lobster fishermen. I'm not sure we're going to give any money to the lobster fishermen in the areas that the NDP represent, but anyway, maybe a little bit, Yeah, that's good. But anyway, Mr. Speaker, the lobster fishery is not a static industry, and it is impacted by currency trends, oil pricing trends, global economic trends, policy changes, and our changing demographics. A lobster fisher must be an astute business person to succeed in such a dynamic environment. And Mr. Speaker, the recent change that was brought up by the member from Shelburne, by DFO, relating to the combination of licenses. Before the change, two fishermen could form a partnership and fish on the same boat. This would cut back on fuel costs and boat costs. They were not allowed to fish twice the trap limit, but only 1.5 times the trap limit. So if a single license could fish 400 traps, two licenses fishing together on the same boat could fish 600 traps. This flexibility gave fishers an option to work together to save on expenses. The trust agreement issue often played into these partnerships. The second license was on a boat, sometimes placed in the name of a crew member, while the real owner of the license was the skipper. So the DFO change basically legalized this form of a partnership agreement, and the license holder would be allowed to hold a second license on his boat and fish 1.5 times the trap limit. Again, Mr. Speaker, this was a very controversial issue. Many believe that all should be equal and there should be no flexibility in the partnership option. This new development is different than the trust agreement controversy. The owner-operator is still respected, and the change in the partnership rules. The only ones who can get a second license to put on their boats are the independent fishermen themselves, and they must be on their boat fishing the license. This change is intended to give some fishermen the flexibility to reduce expenses. But, Mr. Speaker, I do have some concerns as well about the consultation process leading up to this policy change. The industry talked with DFO about owner-operator for years. And DFO officials say that some of the fleet rationalization was part of those discussions. I understand that many fishermen do not see it this way and are not happy with this change that was made by DFO. So, Mr. Speaker, it is my intention to talk to the new Fisheries Minister about this policy. A letter is being prepared from myself to the Federal Minister on this very topic to raise my concerns about the consultation process and what the fishermen have told me. And as we move forward, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of key issues surrounding this new policy that must be made clear. One is the owner-operator must continue to be respected, and our government has committed to that. DFO says that independent fishermen can only combine 2 licenses, not many licenses. And I want to make sure that there's a guarantee to that effect. As well, fishermen have the option of decoupling these licenses. In other words, if economic circumstances improve, or if a son or daughter wants to get into the industry, they can split the double license to form 2 licenses again. I want to know how DFO plans to ensure that this option will continue into the future. This change in partnership policy is contributed to the fear that many fishermen have about the possible accumulation of many licenses by one individual or corporation. DFO tells us that this will not happen and the owner-operator policy will be respected. Even fishermen who want economic flexibility are concerned that this policy could be a slippery slope that will lead to excessive consolidation. The policy as stated will not allow excessive consolidation, but what about the future? We need to ensure the future steps, the next steps. Mr. Speaker, I strongly believe that DFO addressed the owner-operator issue in good faith. I want to be sure they are approaching this partnership change with the same outlook for independent inshore fishermen. And as I said earlier, the lobster fishery is the most important fishery in the province of Nova Scotia. It drives our coastal economy, so every issue and every change is of interest to me and interest to our government. I intend to address this matter with DFO, Mr. Speaker. Their policies must address our economic interest, and licensing policies must also allow our independent fishermen flexibility to deal with economic realities that are faced in our province and in the global marketplace. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the honourable member from Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to stand in my place tonight and speak on Resolution 4511. This resolution was brought forth by the member of Shelburne, and I agreed with it. I agreed, and the resolution stated that he was asking the member, the Minister of Fisheries of Nova Scotia, to write a letter to the federal minister and stating the concerns of the fishermen. And I want to speak a little about this concern that the fishermen have about this. I've been a fisherman all my life. I've been a fisherman for 15 generations in this province. And I know the concerns in it. I know the ups and downs in it. I know what has happened, and you know the history of the fishery. You can kind of predict the future. And it's good to know. That's good to know history, because you don't want to make the same mistakes twice. And if you know that, you shouldn't make them twice. It's all about stacking licenses. Stacking the licenses in the lobster fishery of Nova Scotia, all of Atlantic Canada. But I'm just going to stick to Nova Scotia here around this coast. It's about elimination of people if this takes place, Mr. Speaker. It's all about elimination of people. We've seen it, you know, and we're just saying, like the minister said earlier, it's only 2 licenses we're going to put together. Well, in 5 years, if the fleet is cut, is sold 10% each year, in 5 years we got the lobster fishing fleet of Nova Scotia cut in half. Cut in half. That's eliminating a lot of 1,000 jobs in the coastal communities of Nova Scotia. And you know, there's really no need of that, because, you know, the DFO said in 1996 in the ground fishery, there's too many people chasing too few fish. That was the words. They still echo in my head. I go to sleep at night and they echo there. Too many people chasing too few fish. Okay, we accepted that because we annihilated the ground fishery. They brought in quotas. Similar, I mean, the lobster fishery we have now has quota. You've got a quota of time, you have a quota of traps. And that's what we fish by. We put all of our small ones back, and someday, hopefully, maybe even put some big ones back. We're looking at that. It's called effort control. We've had an effort control fishery in the lobster fishery for many years, and you control the effort. Somehow, DFO thinks you're going to slow the effort up by doubling up licenses. By 2 right now, but what about 2 years down the road? Do we go to 3 licenses per boat? Once you open that door, you can open another one. Shit, let's go to 4. Let's go to 5. Let's go to 6.
I apologize. Not this time. The honourable member knows that word is certainly not parliamentary language, and I would ask the honourable member to withdraw that word, please.
I apologize, Mr.
Thank you,
Speaker.
sir.
Sometimes I get carried away, and I think I'm on the end of the wharf down in Digby Neck. I'm sorry.
Don't take a long walk.
Another 5 years here, I'm sure I'll get over that. Maybe. Maybe. Hopefully I will. I'm sorry. I apologize again, Mr. Speaker. Anyway, we're going to go back to the ground fishery, 1996. Too many people chasing too few fish. So we put the quotas. We put quotas onto the boats. So the only way the boats could operate, they had to pull the quotas together. They kept buying up and buying up and buying up. So let's take a fleet of 400 boats down in Southwest Nova, has gone to 40 boats today in the ground fishery. Give or take a few. Gone to 40 boats. And this is a matter since 1996. What, 12 years? I was only talking half in the lobster, but it'll go farther than that. I believe, fishermen believe, it'll go farther than that. I can see down the road in the lobster fishery, if that door's open, I can see them 40 boats that's fishing ground fish right now, fishing all the lobster traps too. I can see that. I can envision it because it's happened to us. In the area of Digby Neck, in the islands, we used to have 20 fish plants there. They're gone. We have 2 left. We have to import our fish to that area. Thank God now we're looking at growing fish. We got to grow some there to sustain our community. But the ground fishery was gone because the money bought it out. Everybody has their price, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to money, when it comes to business. So the ground fishery was taken out of that area, completely gone in 12 years. Just amazing. So here we are, we're looking at the same thing in the lobster fishery. Same idea. You won't be buying quota this time, you'll be buying licenses. It'll go from 2 to 3 to 4. And DFO says it's for economic reasons. We can catch the lobsters a little more economically. But how does that work economically? We can catch them a little more economically, but we're going to cut the workforce out of our coastal communities maybe by 90%. That's quite economical. The only fishery that we got left in our coastal waters. And we're going to cut that down maybe 90%, just like the ground fishery. I can see it. I can see it. The fishermen can see that coming. If this isn't, but all they want to do is talk to DFO about it, and that's what the resolution was about. The resolution was for the minister to talk to the minister in Ottawa, so we could get together and talk this over. You know, or do you know what you're doing there? Sure, they know what they're doing. Too many people chasing too few fish work in the quota for the ground fishery. Now it's too many people chasing too many lobsters. That's what they're using this time. It's for economics, though. It'd be better for the economics. Instead of grossing $300,000 a year, you can gross $600 per boat. That isn't enough. Let's go to $1.2 million. Take 4 licenses per boat with 3 men instead of 12 being hired. You know, yeah, it'll come down to 1 boat. After all, fish them all up. I could see it. I could feel it. Now, if DFO's worrying about the markets, worrying about the markets, why don't they work on the market? I remember when I was a child, before we had any market, everybody was lobster fishing. Everybody in the community. We couldn't even sell them. What we couldn't eat and give away, we threw on the fields, fertilizer. Nobody then come and tell us, get out of the fishery, do it more economically. Wasn't none of that. DFO didn't even exist. We survived. We had salt fish in the basement, potatoes, barn full of wood, lobsters. Some on the field, growing. We're getting back to the manure pile, Mr. Speaker. Let's heap her. Everything is going to the heap. Everything needs to be heaped up. And it's in the Department of Fisheries. The Department of Fisheries doing this because they don't want to manage the fishery anymore. They want 2 or 3 or 4 people in the country to manage the fishery for them, to own the fishery, to manage it for them. Now that's the belief of the fishermen that I represent. And it sounds like common sense to me, Mr. Speaker. It sounds like good common sense. So let's get back to the markets. If they're worrying about the markets, get out, and work and get some more market. We know the United States is in trouble, big trouble, and that's 80% of the, we sell 80% of our lobsters to the U.S. market. Too much dependence on them. We have a little going Japan. You know, we could sell lobsters right here in western Nova Scotia. There's more money in Alberta than there is in all the United States right now. And call somebody in Alberta and ask them if they can buy a lobster out there. Why isn't these buyers looking for the markets? Europe. I got friends in Europe. When they can find one over there, Mr. Speaker, their highs in Sweden, $42 a pound. And you watch another thing. I want to speak about another thing, about our own markets around Halifax here. Go to the market Christmas time when we're getting $3 a pound down the wharf. Go over here to a store and see what the price is. If they're not $11.99, I'll eat my shirt. Now you watch it. I've watched it for years. The fishermen have too. That's what's going on. So if DFO wants to do something, maybe they could talk to the markets. If they're going to be $3 a pound out of the boat, sell them to the people here in the city for $5. They still make $2. Only cost them 50 cents to get them there. If it's going to be hard times, give the people a feed of lobsters this fall and leave the fishermen alone with doubling up the licenses. Because when you do, you're going to eliminate, I don't know where the people's all going to go out of the coastal communities. There's only going to be one in Digby, one in Shelburne, and fishing what's there. And I can see it coming, Mr. Speaker. I can see it coming. I mean, so this thing, and all the fishermen want to do, all the fishermen want right now is to sit down with the Minister of Fisheries, the Federal Minister of Fisheries, and speak about this. And they can see where this is going to go. They can see that the only fishery we got, the only viable fishery, keep it spread out. Romeo LeBlanc in 1977 seen it. He had to buy licenses back. The lobster went down. So we bought enough back out of the system to level her off to where it is today. And ever since 1977 to today, Mr. Speaker, the lobster fishery has grown. It's a good fishery. It's one of the success fisheries of Canada. And they're going to start putting this in the pile, the manure pile. Keep her spread out, Mr. Speaker. Keep it spread out, and we will survive in the coastal communities of this province. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the honourable member from Pictou.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure for me to rise in the discussion on Resolution 4511, because this was a resolution that was put forward by the member from Shelburne. And the member from Shelburne, I have a tremendous respect for. And I also have a similar respect for the minister from Digby Annapolis. There have been quite a few faux pas in the House today. I think the Minister of Health made a good one this afternoon. So certainly these two members, Mr. Speaker, know more about the fishery than all the rest of those in this House combined. These two members have wrung more salt water out of their mittens than most of us have seen. So I have a tremendous respect for what they have said here today. And because I've known them for a long time, and what I want to say here today is that I started out working with the Department of Fisheries as a public relations officer, and consultation, Mr. Speaker, was one of the things that was of paramount importance. When there is no consultation, it is a problem from the very beginning, and this is what happened with this issue. There was absolutely no consultation. This issue is about consultation, consultation, consultation. It is a situation of communications. Mr. Speaker, as a former employee of the Department of Fisheries, having had 4 jobs there, first as a public relations officer, then as manager of field services, then as aquaculture administrator, and then as marine advisor, I feel I know something about the fishery, but certainly not as much or nearly as much, and I will never know what the 2 honourable members know that have spoken before me. The situation is that when I was involved as manager of field services, I was the boss of the Minister of Health's uncle for 13 years, a man that I respect, Arnold Muse, an outstanding person in southwestern Nova Scotia, and I asked the Minister of Health to go and talk to Uncle Arnold, and he will look at 2 sides on this issue, and he would have supported sending a letter to the federal minister. I know that he would have done that. When I was involved as manager of field services, every dumping day in every area of this province, every lobster fishing area of this province, I tried to be aboard the vessels that were going out either on dumping day or first haul. And I have gone out on vessels from Bay St. Lawrence, Glace Bay, on that side of the province in Cape Breton, down to southwestern Nova Scotia. I've gone out of Woods Harbour, Shag Harbour, Clark's Harbour. I've gone out of Yarmouth and Westport. I've spent a lot of time on the water, and I know the lobster industry. And there are some severe problems, and people are talking economy of scale, and they are talking a number of issues, but we are concerned about the numbers of fishers that are going to be displaced and the eventual move to a corporate fishery. And that is what this issue is about. We are, in fact, looking at stacking, which is, you know, there was an issue of combining licenses. Combining licenses, they were easily separated again. One of the concerns that we have about this stacking is that we're not exactly sure how easy the separation is going to be of those licenses, and that is a key here. So what I'm saying is that we should stop this implementation until there has been consultation. Stop the implementation until there has been consultation. Now, there was from the opposite side, from the government, there was a refusal to send a letter to the minister. And this thing came about, in fact, when there was no minister really in place. And Gail Shea, the Honourable Gail Shea, is in fact the new Minister of Fisheries and Oceans. And I think she needs a little bit of information from Nova Scotia on this issue. Now, I have a great respect for Gail Shea. I've heard of her over the years. She was a member of the Legislative Assembly of Prince Edward Island for a number of years. She was the Minister of Community and Cultural Affairs. She was involved with the Status of Women, the Workers' Compensation Board, the Island Waste Management Corporation, and she was the Minister of Transportation and Public Works. No mention whatsoever about fisheries. Now, I think we should be getting information off to that new minister to inform her about the concerns of southwestern Nova Scotia. And that's not too much to ask, Mr. Speaker. That's not too much to ask. You know, I just ran this off a moment ago. Her background includes being Vice President and Treasurer of the Royal Canadian Legion, Branch Number 6, and she was a school trustee, and she did a lot of good things. She was the former president of the local Home and School Association. She doesn't understand the implementations, the implications that are involved with the implementation of this stacking issue. And the department has done this. The department has done this without any consultation with the industry. Now, I understand there are two sides to this story. In fact, I talked to the executive director of one of the fish harvester organizations, and the executive director said that that organization had mixed views on this. But even if there are mixed views out there among fish harvesters, there should have been the opportunity for input. If you don't have input on an issue, you feel that you've had no say in the matter whatsoever, and this is something that is arbitrarily put on you as a person earning and living from this industry. Now, consultation is so important. You know, very quickly, in my area, I've been dealing with a company that is involved with 30 wind turbines, and certainly has been dealing with the Department of Environment on that issue. And at first, the communications was very poor. The communications, the company itself admits that there was not proper communications involved in the process. So this company was sharp enough to send a person to meet with all of the local people, to set up a liaison committee for proper input into the placement of these turbines. They are in the process of establishing a newsletter to get the information out. Here is a situation where poor communications has turned into something that is very positive. And DFO has the same opportunity here. DFO should stop the implementation of this policy until there has been consultation and communication with fish harvesters in this province. Mr. Speaker, there's a member of Parliament in this province that I have a lot of respect for. Peter Stouffer. Peter Stouffer. And Peter Stouffer, and I quote, recently said, if it is just a temporary measure, talking about stacking, he says, if it is just a temporary measure to help mitigate the cost to fishermen, then it is something we could support. But if it is something that leads to long-term stacking of licenses, eventually half the fleet gets eliminated by this process. Instead of having 2 licenses on the boat, then eventually you could have 3 or 4 licenses on the boat. That boat now has to be much bigger. Then all of a sudden you realize, why do we have to have all these people on the boat? So we're talking economy of scale on one hand, and we have loss of jobs on the other hand. But there should at least be an opportunity for input. You know, as aquaculture administrator in this province, I found that the companies that went out trying to promote an aquaculture site, when they went out, consulted with the people, they made progress. DFO, with the arbitrary approach that has been taken here, is not doing the right thing. And this new minister and our minister should be sitting down to discuss this issue. They should be sitting down and letters should be exchanged. My golly, to ask for a letter to be exchanged, is that much of a commitment? For that to be voted down is an insult to all the fish harvesters. It's an insult to the member from Shelburne. It's an insult to the member from Annapolis, Digby Annapolis. These fish harvesters harvesters have, in fact, put forward sound arguments. Sound arguments they have put forward. And they will continue to put forward until that government acts on this issue. And I say to you, go home and talk to Uncle Arnold. Uncle Arnold will advise you and advise the minister
Order,
to
please.
consult.
Order, please.
To consult.
Order, please. Order, please. The time allotted for debate on Resolution 4511 has now expired. The time allotted for opposition business has expired. The chair recognizes the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I move that the House do now rise and meet again tomorrow from the hour of 12 noon to hours from 12 noon to 4 p.m. and that following the daily routine and orders of the day, that we go to government business, public bills for second reading, including possible consideration of 187, 196, 199, 200, 201, 203, and Bill 204.
Thank you. The motion for adjournment has been made. Is the House ready for the question? The question has been called. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. The House will rise to sit again tomorrow between the hours of 12 noon and 4 p.m. We have arrived at the moment of interruption. The adjournment debate for this evening was chosen earlier. Be it resolved that members of this House recognize the significance of the signing this past Friday of a historic agreement that will improve educational opportunities for Nova Scotia's Mi'kmaq students. The Chair recognizes the Honourable, the Acting Minister of Education.